The 24-hour rule. How one pause saves thousands from the dopamine trap. Everyone thinks saving money is hard. They're wrong. Saving money is one of the simplest mechanical acts a human being can perform. You earn $1, you don't spend it. That's it. The math is embarrassingly straightforward. A child can understand it. A spreadsheet can execute it perfectly every single time without ever feeling tired, lonely, bored, or afraid. What's actually hard, brutally, systemically, biologically hard, is not spending. Read that again. Not spending is the skill, not saving. The distinction sounds semantic. It isn't. It's the difference between understanding why diets fail and why they succeed. Nobody fails a diet because they don't know that vegetables are healthier than donuts. They fail because at 11 p.m., standing in front of an open refrigerator, the knowledge becomes completely irrelevant. The body has already made the decision. The conscious mind is just watching. The same thing happens with your money. Every single day. You already know you should save. You've known it for years. You've read the articles, watched the YouTube videos, maybe even opened a savings account with genuine enthusiasm. And yet the money keeps disappearing. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, not on yachts or gambling tables. It disappears in $47 increments, in flash sales, in "I deserve this" moments, in the quiet, almost invisible act of clicking "add to cart" while your brain floods with something that feels exactly like relief. That feeling is not an accident. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness or weakness or a lack of discipline. It's physics. And until you understand the physics, you will keep fighting the wrong battle with the wrong weapons and losing in ways you can't even fully see. Here's the central problem that nobody explains correctly. You are not fighting your spending habits. You are fighting gravity. Not metaphorical gravity. Actual, structural, systemic force. The kind that operates whether you're paying attention or not. The kind that doesn't care about your intentions or your vision board or your New Year's resolution. The kind that pulls everything downward, always, without exception, until something with sufficient velocity escapes it. In orbital mechanics, there's a concept called escape velocity. It's the minimum speed an object must reach to break free from a gravitational field without any additional propulsion. For Earth, that number is approximately 11.2 kilometers per second. Below that threshold, it doesn't matter how hard you try. It doesn't matter how much fuel you burn. Gravity wins. The object falls back. Now, here's what nobody tells you about personal finance. The consumer economy is a gravitational field. It has been engineered with billions of dollars of research, decades of behavioral psychology, and the most sophisticated targeting algorithms ever built to pull your money out of your hands at the exact moment you are least equipped to resist. The checkout button is placed precisely where your thumb naturally rests. The limited time offer countdown timer is calibrated to the exact duration of human patience. The one-click purchase was not invented for your convenience. It was invented to eliminate the one thing that stands between your money and someone else's revenue. The pause. The pause is everything. The pause is escape velocity. And the entire architecture of modern commerce has been designed at extraordinary expense to make sure you never experience it. Think about what Amazon did when they introduced one-click purchasing. They didn't just make buying faster, they surgically removed the moment of friction, the brief, uncomfortable gap between wanting something and having it, that historically served as the only natural checkpoint between impulse and action. They patented the removal of your pause. They built $1 billion business on the elimination of the one cognitive tool that could have protected you. That's not a coincidence. That's engineering. And you're trying to fight it with willpower. Willpower is not a strategy against engineering. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day, degrades under stress, collapses under sleep deprivation, and evaporates entirely in the presence of emotional pain. You cannot out-willpower a system that has been specifically designed to attack you at your weakest moments. That's like trying to stop a river with your hands. The river doesn't get tired, you do. So the question is not, how do I become more disciplined? The question is, how do I build a structure that makes the pause automatic? The answer is the 24-hour rule. But to understand why it works, really works, at the neurological level, you first need to understand what you're actually up against. Let's talk about what poverty actually costs. Not in the obvious ways, not in the I can't afford rent ways. In the invisible, compounding, structural ways that most people who have never been poor don't understand, and most people who are poor are too exhausted to articulate. There is a concept in Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels, later formalized by economists and cited in academic literature, called the Vimes Boots Theory of socioeconomic unfairness. Sam Vimes, a working-class cop, observes that a man who can only afford $10 boots will buy a new pair every year because they fall apart. A man who can afford $50 boots buys a pair that lasts a decade. Over 10 years, the poor man spends $100. The rich man spends $50. Poverty is expensive. Not because poor people make bad decisions, because the system charges more for being poor. This is not a metaphor, this is arithmetic. If you have $400 in your bank account and your car breaks down, you put the repair on a credit card at 24% APR. If you have $4,000 in your bank account, you pay cash. Over the course of a year, the person with $400 pays roughly $96 in interest on that repair. The person with $4,000 pays nothing. Same car, same repair, different tax for being poor. If you buy groceries in small quantities because you can't afford to stock up, you pay retail price per unit. If you can afford to buy in bulk, you pay wholesale price per unit. The person with less money pays more per calorie every single time. If you live paycheck to paycheck and an unexpected expense hits, a medical bill, a parking ticket, a broken appliance, you have no buffer. You borrow. You pay fees, you pay interest, you pay late penalties. You pay the poverty premium that the financial system charges for the crime of not having enough money to avoid needing to borrow money. The system is not neutral. The system is a ratchet. It tightens downward. And here's where it connects directly to spending behavior. When you are operating at the bottom of this system, when every unexpected expense is a crisis, when there is no margin, when the math is always tight, your brain does not experience this as a financial problem. Your brain experiences this as a survival threat. And survival threats trigger a very specific, very ancient, very powerful neurological response. The stress response. Cortisol floods your system. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and rational decision-making, goes partially offline. Your amygdala, the part responsible for immediate threat response, takes over. You become, in a very literal neurological sense, less intelligent. This is not an insult. This is biology. A 2013 study published in Science by Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir demonstrated that the cognitive burden of poverty, the constant mental load of managing financial scarcity, reduces effective IQ by approximately 13 points. That's the equivalent of losing a full night of sleep every day, indefinitely, while also being asked to make complex financial decisions that will determine the trajectory of your life. 13 points. Gone. Not because you're less capable, because your brain is running a background process called, how do I survive this month? That consumes cognitive bandwidth that would otherwise be available for strategic thinking. And into this gap, this exhausted, cortisol-soaked, cognitively depleted gap, steps the dopamine system. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. This is one of the most consequential misunderstandings in popular neuroscience. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It is released not when you receive a reward, but when you expect one. The spike happens in the moment of wanting, not the moment of having. This is why the experience of shopping, browsing, selecting, imagining yourself with the item often feels better than actually owning the thing. This is why the notification that your package has shipped produces a measurable neurological response. This is why add to cart is satisfying even before you check out. The dopamine system evolved to motivate behavior. It was designed to make you pursue food, shelter, mates, things that kept you alive. It is extraordinarily powerful. It is also extraordinarily easy to hijack. Modern retail has hijacked it completely. The flash sale creates artificial scarcity, which triggers loss aversion, which spikes dopamine. The customers also bought algorithm creates social proof, which triggers belonging instinct, which spikes dopamine. The countdown timer creates urgency, which triggers the hunting response, which spikes dopamine. The free shipping threshold, you're only $12 away from free shipping, creates a goal, which triggers the completion drive, which spikes dopamine. Every element of the modern purchasing experience has been optimized to produce a neurological state that feels like excitement, urgency, and reward, and to produce it before you have had any time to think. Because thinking is the enemy of impulse purchasing. And impulse purchasing is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Now, layer this on top of the stress response. You are exhausted. You are anxious. Your prefrontal cortex is running at reduced capacity. Your cortisol is elevated. You feel, in some vague but persistent way, that your life is not what it should be. And then your phone shows you something, a jacket, a gadget, a course, a piece of furniture, and for a brief, bright moment, the dopamine spike cuts through the gray fog of chronic stress, and you feel something that resembles hope. That feeling is real. The relief is real. The neurological response is genuine, but it is not solving the problem. It is medicating the symptom while the underlying condition worsens. This is what behavioral economists call present bias, the tendency to overweight immediate rewards relative to future ones. Under stress, present bias intensifies dramatically. The future becomes abstract. The relief available right now becomes overwhelming. And the $200 you spend on something you don't need is not just $200. It's $200 that won't be in your account when the next crisis hits, which means the next crisis will be slightly worse, which means the stress will be slightly higher, which means the next dopamine spike will be slightly more irresistible. This is the trap, not a metaphorical trap, a feedback loop with measurable, predictable dynamics. And the exit from this loop is not discipline. It's not motivation. It's not a better budget spreadsheet. It's a pause. 24 hours. That's the entire intervention. That's the whole rule. Before purchasing anything that is not a consumable necessity, food, medicine, utilities, you wait 24 hours. You do not buy it now. You put it in a cart or write it down or screenshot it, and you come back tomorrow. This sounds almost insultingly simple. It is. That's the point. The sophistication is not in the rule. The sophistication is in understanding why the rule works at the neurological level, and why that simplicity is not a weakness, but a feature. Here's what happens in those 24 hours. The dopamine spike fades. This is not a metaphor. The neurological state that made the purchase feel urgent and necessary and emotionally resonant has a half-life. It dissipates. The cortisol that was driving the stress relief-seeking behavior fluctuates with your sleep cycle. Cortisol is naturally lowest in the evening and early morning, which means that a purchase that felt essential at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday will feel considerably less essential at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday after you've slept. The prefrontal cortex comes back online, the part of your brain that can actually evaluate whether this purchase serves your long-term interests. The part that was partially suppressed by stress and dopamine gets a chance to participate in the decision. You are literally a different cognitive entity 24 hours later. Not a better person, a more complete one. The social context dissolves. A significant percentage of impulse purchases are driven by social comparison, seeing something someone else has, feeling the gap between your current self and your aspirational self, trying to close that gap with a transaction. 24 hours later, the specific social trigger that activated the purchase impulse has usually faded. The Instagram post you saw is buried under 100 others. The colleague's new car is no longer fresh in your mind. The comparison that felt so sharp and painful has softened. The scarcity illusion collapses. Limited time offer is almost never actually limited. The sale will come back. The item will still be available. The urgency was manufactured. 24 hours of existence in the real world is usually sufficient to reveal this. Studies on this specific intervention, waiting periods before purchases, consistently show that between 24 and 48 hours after the initial impulse, between 60 and 80% of people decide not to make the purchase. Not because they talked themselves out of it, not because they applied discipline, but because the neurological state that made the purchase feel necessary simply no longer exists. The want evaporated. Not because you fought it, because you outlasted it. This is the key insight that changes everything. You don't need to defeat the impulse. You just need to survive it. But here's where most people stop and where the real transformation begins. The 24-hour rule is not just a spending break. Used correctly, it is a cognitive rewiring tool. And the rewiring it enables is far more valuable than any individual purchase it prevents. Let's talk about what happens when you consistently apply this rule over 30, 60, 90 days. First, you accumulate data. Every item you put in the wait category and then don't buy is a data point. Over time, you begin to see patterns. You notice that you impulse shop most heavily on Sunday evenings. The Sunday scaries, the anticipatory anxiety about the week ahead, driving you toward retail therapy. You notice that you spend more after scrolling social media for more than 20 minutes. You notice that certain emotional states, loneliness, boredom, a sense of stagnation, reliably produce purchase impulses. You're not just saving money, you are mapping your own psychological vulnerabilities with precision. This map is extraordinarily valuable, because once you can see the pattern, you can intervene upstream. Instead of fighting the impulse at the moment of purchase, you can address the emotional state that generates the impulse. Sunday evenings become a time for a specific ritual, a walk, a call with a friend, a book, rather than a time for online shopping. The root cause gets addressed. The symptom stops appearing. Second, you begin to experience a neurological shift in what produces dopamine. This sounds impossible. It isn't. The dopamine system is plastic. It responds to conditioning. If you consistently pair the act of not spending with a positive outcome, watching your savings balance grow, experiencing the satisfaction of having money available when you need it, feeling the security of a financial buffer, your brain begins to associate saving with reward. This is not a metaphor or a motivational platitude. This is operant conditioning. The same mechanism that makes gambling addictive can be redirected. The same neurological pathway that fires when you click buy now can be trained to fire when you watch your net worth increase. But it requires repetition. It requires consistency. And it requires that you make the reward visible. This is why tracking matters. Not budgeting, tracking. There is a crucial difference. Budgeting is a constraint. It feels like deprivation. It activates the scarcity mindset that makes you want to spend more, not less. Tracking is observation. It's data collection. It's watching a number change. And watching a number change in the right direction produces a measurable dopamine response. Every financial app that shows you a progress bar toward a savings goal is exploiting this mechanism. The progress bar is not decorative. It's a dopamine delivery system. It's giving your brain the same neurological reward that the add to cart button was providing, but attached to behavior that actually serves your long-term interests. You are not becoming more disciplined. You are redirecting the same neurological machinery toward a different target. Now let's talk about the deeper architecture of the escape. Because the 24-hour rule, as powerful as it is a tactic. And tactics without strategy are just friction. You need to understand what you're building toward, not just what you're moving away from. The first phase is what I call the monk mode of financial recovery. This is the period, ideally 90 days, minimum 30, during which you implement radical, temporary austerity. Not permanent deprivation, temporary clarity. During this period, you apply the 24-hour rule to everything non-essential. You eliminate subscriptions you don't actively use. You cook instead of ordering delivery. You wear what you have instead of buying what you want. You create, deliberately and consciously, a gap between your income and your expenditure. The purpose of this phase is not the money you save, though that matters. The purpose is the cognitive recovery. Remember the 13-point IQ reduction from financial stress? The inverse is also true. As your financial buffer grows, even modestly, the background stress of scarcity begins to diminish. The cortisol drops. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. You begin to think more clearly, plan more effectively, and make better decisions across every domain of your life. This is not a financial benefit. This is a cognitive benefit that happens to have financial consequences. The monk mode is not about punishment. It's about reclaiming the mental bandwidth that chronic financial stress has been consuming. It's about giving your brain the space to think strategically rather than reactively. It's about breaking the feedback loop long enough to see it from the outside. Most people never experience this. They go from financial stress to financial stress, managing symptoms, never addressing the underlying system. The monk mode is the interruption. It's the pattern break. It's the moment you step off the treadmill long enough to notice that you've been running in place. The second phase is what separates people who temporarily improve their finances from people who permanently transform them. It's the construction of what I call the moat. A moat, in competitive strategy, is a durable advantage that protects you from competition. Warren Buffett uses this term to describe businesses with structural advantages that are difficult to replicate. The same concept applies to personal economics. Your moat is not your savings account. Your savings account is a buffer. Important, necessary, but not a moat. Your moat is the combination of skills, knowledge, and relationships that makes you increasingly valuable over time and increasingly difficult to replace. Here's the critical insight about skill development that most people miss. Being excellent at one thing makes you replaceable. Being competent at the intersection of 2 or 3 things makes you rare. A person who is a good writer is competing with millions of good writers. A person who is a good writer and understands data analysis is competing with thousands. A person who is a good writer, understands data analysis, and has domain expertise in a specific industry is competing with hundreds. The intersection is where scarcity lives. Scarcity is where leverage lives. Leverage is where income growth lives. The 24-hour rule creates the financial space to invest in this intersection. The money you don't spend on impulse purchases becomes the money you spend on courses, books, tools, and experiences that compound your skill set. The cognitive bandwidth you recover from financial stress becomes the bandwidth you use to learn, practice, and build. This is the transition from linear to exponential. A salary is linear. You trade time for money at a fixed rate. Skills compound. Each new capability you add doesn't just add to your value, it multiplies it because it creates new intersections, new combinations, new forms of scarcity that the market rewards. The 24-hour rule is not just about not buying a jacket you don't need. It's about redirecting the resources, financial and cognitive, that were being consumed by the dopamine trap into the construction of something that grows. There is a social dimension to this that almost nobody talks about honestly, and it is arguably the most difficult part of the entire process. Your spending habits are not just personal. They are social. They are embedded in a network of relationships, expectations, norms, and identities that exert constant pressure on your behavior. This is what sociologists call conspicuous consumption, spending not for utility but for social signaling. The car that's slightly nicer than you need. The restaurant that's slightly more expensive than you can comfortably afford. The vacation that you document more than you experience. These are not irrational behaviors. They are rational responses to a social environment that uses consumption as a proxy for status, competence, and belonging. The problem is that this social environment is often most intense among people who can least afford it. There is a phenomenon in behavioral economics sometimes called the crab bucket effect. The observation that in a bucket of crabs, any crab that tries to climb out will be pulled back down by the others. Not out of malice, out of the mechanical reality of how crabs move. The same dynamic operates in social groups where financial struggle is the norm. When you start saving aggressively, declining social invitations, cooking at home instead of going out, driving the same car for another year, the people around you will notice. Some will be supportive, many will not. You've changed. You think you're better than us now? It's just money. You can't take it with you. Live a little. These are not attacks. They are the sound of a social system trying to maintain equilibrium. Your behavior is a mirror that makes other people's choices visible to them. That's uncomfortable. The discomfort gets redirected at you. This is not a reason to abandon your goals. It is a reason to be strategic about your social environment. The research on behavior change is unambiguous on this point. The single most powerful predictor of whether someone maintains a new behavior is whether the people around them support it. Not willpower, not motivation, not intelligence. Social environment. This means that the 24-hour rule practiced in isolation is significantly harder than the 24-hour rule practiced within a community of people who share your values. It means that finding even one or two people who are on a similar financial journey, who celebrate savings milestones instead of mocking them, who suggest free activities instead of expensive ones, who talk about money as a tool rather than a taboo, can be the difference between temporary improvement and permanent transformation. If you don't have those people in your physical life, find them in your intellectual life. Books are mentors. Podcasts are communities. The person who wrote the book you're reading at midnight has already solved the problem you're struggling with. They have already navigated the social pressure, the dopamine traps, the cognitive fog of financial stress. Their thinking is available to you for the price of a library card. This is not a consolation prize. This is a legitimate strategy. The research on parasocial relationships, the psychological bonds people form with authors, podcasters, and public figures they've never met, shows that these relationships produce real behavioral influence. The values, habits, and mental models of the people you consume intellectually become part of your own cognitive architecture over time. Choose your intellectual community as carefully as you choose your physical one. Now let's talk about the mathematics that most people never encounter until it's too late. There are two kinds of math in personal finance. There is the math that works against you, and there's the math that works for you. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives on the wrong side of both. The math that works against you is compound interest on debt. A $5,000 credit card balance at 24% APR with minimum payments takes approximately 17 years to pay off and costs roughly $6,500 in interest. You pay for the original purchase twice, plus a significant premium, spread across nearly 2 decades. The thing you bought, whatever it was, is long gone. The debt remains. This is not a cautionary tale. This is arithmetic. The math doesn't care about your intentions. It executes the same way every month, whether you're paying attention or not. The math that works for you is compound interest on assets. The same $5,000 invested at a modest 8% annual return becomes approximately $10,800 in 10 years. In 20 years, it becomes $23,300. In 30 years, it becomes $50,300. You did nothing. The math did the work. The money made money, which made money, which made money. The difference between these two outcomes, $6,500 in interest paid versus $50,300 in wealth accumulated, is not intelligence, it's not income, it's not luck. It's which side of the equation you're on. The 24-hour rule is the mechanism that moves you from one side to the other. Every impulse purchase you don't make is not just money saved. It is potential compound growth preserved. The $200 jacket you didn't buy at 25 is not $200. At 8% annual return, it's $2,000 at 65. The $50 you don't spend on a restaurant meal you didn't really want is not $50. It's $500 in 40 years. This is not an argument for never spending money on things you enjoy. It's an argument for spending money intentionally, for making conscious choices about what genuinely adds value to your life, rather than unconscious choices driven by dopamine spikes and manufactured urgency. The person who applies the 24-hour rule consistently is not depriving themselves. They are filtering. They are separating the purchases that genuinely serve their values and well-being from the purchases that serve the dopamine system and the retail industry. The former category is worth every dollar. The latter category is worth nothing and costs everything. Let's be precise about what rewiring your brain actually means in practice, because this phrase gets thrown around in self-help content with almost no operational specificity. The brain changes through a process called neuroplasticity, the formation and strengthening of neural pathways through repeated activation. Every time you perform a behavior, the neural pathway associated with that behavior becomes slightly more efficient, slightly more automatic, slightly more likely to activate in similar future circumstances. This is how habits form. This is also how habits change. When you apply the 24-hour rule and then don't make the purchase, you are doing two things simultaneously. You are weakening the neural pathway that connects impulse to purchase by interrupting it. And you are strengthening the neural pathway that connects impulse to pause by activating it. This takes time. The research on habit formation suggests that New behavioral patterns require between 18 and 254 days to become automatic, with a median around 66 days. This is why 30-day challenges rarely produce lasting change. The behavior hasn't had time to become neurologically embedded. You're still running on willpower, which depletes. At 90 days of consistent application, something different begins to happen. The pause starts to feel natural. The impulse still arrives. It will always arrive, because the dopamine system doesn't stop working, but the automatic response to the impulse shifts. Instead of click, the automatic response becomes wait. The friction has been internalized. The rule has become a reflex. This is the threshold you're working toward. Not perfect discipline, not the elimination of desire, just the automatic insertion of a pause between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, writing from a context of unimaginable suffering, identified this gap between stimulus and response as the location of human freedom. He was right, and it applies to Amazon checkout pages as surely as it applies to anything else. The pause is where your agency lives. There's one more dimension of this that deserves direct, unsentimental attention. The 24-hour rule will feel at first like deprivation. This is not a side effect. This is the process. The dopamine system, when denied its usual inputs, produces a response that feels remarkably similar to withdrawal. Irritability, restlessness, a vague but persistent sense that something is missing. The urge to check your phone, to browse, to find something to want. This is not weakness. This is your nervous system recalibrating. The recalibration is uncomfortable. It is also temporary. And on the other side of it is something that most people who have been caught in the consumption loop have never experienced as adults. The ability to sit with desire without acting on it. The ability to want something and simply observe the wanting, without the wanting controlling your behavior. This is not asceticism. This is not the rejection of pleasure. This is the recovery of agency. The ability to choose deliberately and consciously what you pursue, rather than being pulled by whatever neurological current happens to be strongest in the moment. The person who has this ability is not poorer than the person who doesn't. They are richer in the only currency that actually matters, the ability to direct their own life. Here's what the data looks like when this works. A person earning $50,000 per year who reduces impulse spending by $300 per month, a conservative estimate for someone who has been spending unconsciously, saves $3,600 per year. Invested at 8% annual return over 30 years, that becomes approximately $440,000. Not from a raise, not from a second job, not from a lucky investment. From the systematic application of a 24-hour pause to purchase decisions. $440,000 from one rule applied consistently. This is not a fantasy. This is arithmetic. The same arithmetic that has been working against you, compound interest on debt, the poverty premium, the cost of financial stress, can work for you. But it requires getting to the other side of the equation. And getting to the other side requires breaking the loop. The loop breaks with a pause. The cage is open. It has always been open. The bars are made of dopamine and cortisol and manufactured urgency and social pressure and the quiet, persistent belief that the relief available right now is worth more than the freedom available later. The bars are real. They are neurological and social and economic, and they have been constructed with extraordinary care and expense by people who profit from your inability to pause. Do not underestimate them. Do not pretend that willpower alone is sufficient to walk through them. But they are not locked. The 24-hour rule is not a financial hack. It is not a budgeting tip. It is not a trick for saving a few dollars on things you didn't really want. It is a practice of reclaiming the pause, the gap between stimulus and response, that is the foundation of every other form of agency you want to exercise in your life. It starts with a jacket you don't buy. It ends with a life you actually chose. The pause is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not after you've read one more article or watched one more video or felt sufficiently motivated. Right now, in this moment, before the next notification arrives and the next dopamine spike fires and the next limited time offer countdown begins. The pause is the practice. The practice is the freedom. 24 hours, that's all it takes to start.